Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Thursday, September 1st, 2022. For those of you that might be new to this format, this is a format where we have family, friends, siblings of Evoke participants attend live, and they're welcome to share any questions, comments, topics they'd like for me to speak of at any time. Anytime you want to write to us at webinar@evoketherapy.com. In between sessions, you could submit questions through that medium also. One thing I want to talk about tonight before we get into the pre-submitted questions is this new offering that we have. We have a new offering, what we're calling a conscious parenting workshop. It's our first ever all-day online workshop, a maximum of 20 participants, so that will allow for a lot of interaction, role plays, and some breakouts. A little bit more intimate than what we're able to do on this format. Even though I do answer and respond to audience questions and comments, this is an opportunity for us to have more of a dialogue and to personalize the content. So it's November 4th, 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. There'll be an hour lunch break for you. It'll be me leading it. I'll have an assistant there with me, kind of helping me moderate the day and take care of things. So I really look forward to that. And if we get over 20 people, then we'll set up a second date for you all. It looks like we have a lot of people that are interested in doing it. So, like I said, before I get into any live questions, you could submit your live questions at any point during the broadcast. We're going to get to the pre-submitted questions that Sarah is moderating for me this evening. So I'll get to that right away. Somebody writes, how do I know that the uncomfortable feelings I feel after many sessions with my therapist are because I'm breaking through and working toward my healing and my emotional wounds and triggers, or that the therapist is just not the right fit for me? It seems many times that I'm spinning my wheels, but I also understand that the goal isn't to be fixed after each session. That is a really great question because I think because it's so difficult to answer. What I would say to you is talk to your therapist about this question. Like I said during the broadcast, this is a follow up from my broadcast the other night about what to look for in a therapist and therapy. Talk to your therapist about the most difficult things and see how they react. If he or she is patient, asks more questions, is curious, empathizes. You know, I said this one time, and a lot of things can be taken out of context and can be not necessarily understood as generally applicable in all situations. And what I said was, therapy should feel good, and I don't mean happy. That would be silly. Then we would just call it a drug, right? We might as well give you morphine. But therapy should make you feel good in the sense that you're not alone. So if you were to share with your therapist your confusion, if you were to share with your therapist that you sometimes feel unsettled or unfinished with it, and if the feeling back to you is warmth and compassion and understanding versus kind of critical, I think, talking at you and explaining to you and simply answering the question, because this is such a personal question that you're asking that there's no simple answer that I could give. If you were my client asking me that question, I would ask more questions. What are you looking for? Is there anything I can do? I would apologize for coming up short if there was any part of that in your description was the way that I was responding or reacting to you. So I think what we're looking for is what I'm describing when I talk about when finding a good therapist and feeling validated is a warmth and a connection. And while you might be experiencing pain or fear, anxiety, depression, all sorts of uncomfortable, unhappy feelings, I think what I would look for is, can they meet you there? Can they meet you in that place so that you're not alone? Because at the end of the day, there are circumstances in all of our lives that cannot be changed. There is loss, there is pain. Obviously, we can't control the people around us, and they can do and say and behave in ways that hurt us and upset us and anger us. But therapy is a place where you don't have to go through it alone, right? We're wounded in relationships and we are healed in relationships. And that's one of the things I think most practitioners of therapy miss, or many miss, is that It's not about giving you answers or fixing things, but it's about meeting you where you're at, helping you not to feel alone in your suffering. And there's some kind of peace that can come with that. So that's my answer to the question. I don't know if that fits for you, but that's what hits me first and foremost. Thank you for the question. Very great question. In the end, it's always probably the directive is going to be talk to the therapist and see how they respond to it, especially if they've done something that hurts, that upsets you, that saddens you, that doesn't sit right with you. That's when you know whether or not you have a therapist that has grown up, become an adult, and can be there with you as an adult and take on the responsibility for their own themselves instead of having you carry it. All right, a pre-submitted question. Somebody writes in and says, "I keep thinking about something you said. I think it was a quote by James Hollis, and here's the quote: "Quote: Romantic love is the discovery of a home that never was." Unquote. I would love to have you expound on this idea. I love this question because I love this quote, and it is poetic and nuanced. The experience of romantic love is that the person is going to heal you, that they're going to meet all of your needs. One of the things that James Hollis says, I believe it's in the middle passage. I could be wrong about that. It might be in the Broken Mirror. But one of the things that he says is if we made explicit, in fact, when I've said this before, people have pointed out to me that we sort of make it explicit in a lot of wedding vows. But he says if we made explicit what the expectation was in marriage, we would see it's utter nonsense, how ridiculous and fantastical it is. Like, will you be there for me all the time? Will you fulfill all of my needs? Can you carry me when I can't carry myself? It's this idea that they can be the perfect parent, really, the parent that you never had. So I think that's what he's describing. It's the fantasy that the person is going to fulfill all your needs, which is, in a way, part of growing up and becoming an adult is grieving the loss. I talk a lot about parenting, right? I'm you might say tough on parents as a group, including myself, in the sense that we all make mistakes. We all dent our children. I say that constantly. I think it's a critical aspect of attachment theory that can be said to invite self awareness in all of us. Having said that, part of becoming an adult is grieving. If we're waiting for somebody to rescue us, I've said this before, and this is not a suggestion or an invitation that we have to become completely independent and isolated. But much of the first half of my life, I was waiting for somebody to rescue me from my pain. I was waiting for my wife, even my therapist, to come in and take it away from me, to heal me. And it wasn't until about 10 years ago that I realized that I was the one that was going to have to do the hardest work of all. I was going to have to face my dragons, so to speak, to face my pain, to face the fact that nobody was going to rescue me from my life. So I think what Hollis is suggesting, I'm confident what he's suggesting, because I also read his book on marriage, and I've done a podcast on it a couple of times. The name of that book is called The Eden Project: The Search for the Magical Other. This fantasy we have in romantic love, all these projections that they're going to be the perfect and ideal parent. When you fall in love, you don't see their faults; they don't matter to you. All of that is a part of the discovery of a home that never was. The discovery of a fantasy, in other words. And Hollis goes on to say specifically about marriage, when the projections fall, when they fall away, as they must, what begins at that point is the work for a sustainable, lifelong type of love, what I call an enduring love. Joseph Campbell, he quotes Joseph Campbell in the Eden Project, and he said, marriage is not a lifelong love affair. Marriage is about submission and yielding and compromising. It's about transformation. And so you have to do all of those things. It's hard work. And hopefully you're equally yoked with your partner. I think it's very, very hard when your partner isn't willing to deal with their shadow, with their dark parts, with their mistakes with their humanity, then you're left to carry it all. I don't really get into that language about marrying a narcissist or a borderline. That may be true diagnostically, but that doesn't really interest me. I say to clients all the time, when you tell me your ex-partner, ex-husband, typically with narcissism, or your ex-wife for that matter, when you tell me that they're a narcissist or a borderline, that's interesting. But what's really compelling and fascinating is, why did you marry a narcissist? Why did you marry an alcoholic? You could ask me, why did I marry an anxious woman? And you could ask her, why did she marry somebody who had a hard time asserting that his needs could be taken care of or would be taken care of? Right? The marriage will expose our unfinished work, just like our children will, just like all of our relationships do. So I hope that answers it. And if you want more, again, the podcast on couples work or the book, The Eden Project, are great, great resources for this work. Changed my life. Somebody writes, one of the characteristics you defined during your discussion about a good therapist Tuesday evening was for that person to have done and continue doing their adult child work. I see a licensed life coach who has done her own adult child work for 20 years and continues to. She is not a trained licensed therapist, but she has been by far the most effective with me. I've seen about 6 therapists through the years. I'm curious about your thoughts, as she is not a licensed therapist. I have no qualms with that. I mean, like, how do I want to say this? There are plenty, the vast majority of therapists have not done their work. And if you have found a coach that has done their work, I think you're going to get virtually everything out of it that you would get with a good, or what I call an adequate therapist. I think you could get that out of, to some degree, a friend or even a mentor. I think you can get that out of a sponsor. I mean, by sponsor in the 12-step program, it's implied that they are farther along on the journey, on the path than you are. And they're part of their recovery is to turn around to those that are behind them on the path and extend a hand. So absolutely, coaches, you know, uh, technically at Evoke, and I announce this every time I do a broadcast, we have life coaches, we have parenting coaches, we have couples coaches that are trained in attachment-based work, because it's online and it's over virtual, either phone or video. So yes, 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 absolutely. The title of therapist or the title of coach, it doesn't make much of a difference. The thing that makes the difference is the substance of their work, of who they are, of what they've done. And like I said on the broadcast, we can extrapolate. When I talk about an adequate or a good therapist, we can extrapolate from that good or adequate therapist and what I'm describing, how they respond to us, to all of our relationships. Now, it's not always going to be the same, because a therapist or a coach virtually isn't going to take care of their needs in the relationship with us, right? The deal with coaching and therapists, and this is not a crass or insensitive comment. When I first heard it, it really hit me as profound. The deal with a therapist or a coach is you pay them for the time. End of deal. You essentially owe them nothing else. You have paid them for the time. And because of that, they are at your disposal. That's probably not the best phrasing, but they are there for you. What do you need from me? How can I help you this hour? And I'm just going to go on one last tangent, because I don't think we have a lot of pre-submitted questions. I don't even know if we have any more. You can submit them if you want me to talk about something. But years ago, I was sitting in the wilderness with a teenage boy, and I think I've told the story a couple of times before. I told the story, or excuse me, I was sitting with him, and I said to him, I expressed some affection and love for him. I care about you. I might have even said I love you, but at least something along the lines of, I really care about you. And he looked at me incredulously and said, what are you talking about? You get paid for this. How can you care about me or love me if you're getting paid to be here? And I didn't know how to answer the question at first because I knew what I felt, but I thought logically he had a good point. And so I thought I would bring it like I do a lot of the times to my therapist who I use for supervision. And as I was driving to the appointment, imagining myself asking the question, telling her the story I just told you, I realized something. I realized I don't pay, her name is Jamie. I don't pay Jamie to love me. I pay for her time. And during that time, I pay her to get to know me, to understand me. And then when she understands me, the love is automatic. And so I asked her the question anyway, and she made the comment about you're not paying me to care, you're paying for my time. And I went back to that 16-year-old young man the next week and I had my answer. I said, I am paid to be here for my time, but loving you is something that happens when I listen to you and understand you. Looks like there might not be any other questions. Is that right? Seeing, oh, there it is. Somebody writes, I recently had my first child and feel overwhelmed occasionally. Life has changed drastically and I feel unprepared. Glad to have joined tonight. Looking for more resources and books on relationships with spouses and children. I already wrote down the Eden Project. Anything by J.D. Gill or James Hollis, I recommend without qualification. J.D. Gill is my therapist. She's written, I don't know what the count is now, 26, 27 books, and she's still writing. They're both about the same age. James Hollis in 2021, I think, was 82. Jamie might be 84. I love experience and wisdom from people who have been through it before me. So anything that comes up there, of course, my two books. Nothing else jumps out at me right now. But a couple of things about your first statement. Um, the I want to say a few things. Overwhelmed is okay, meaning that it's probably better than what I felt when I had my first child, which is I got this. But I know overwhelmed doesn't feel good. I got this feels a lot better. Overwhelmed feels horrible. But approaching it from a conceptual point of view, overwhelmed is a humility. And remember, I've said this before. When you remember that the child is the teacher and you are the student, it changes everything. I think this notion, and it's an emotional and a spiritual notion, that when we think that we're the teacher and we're supposed to have the answers, some of the biggest parenting blunders and mistakes that I've made and that others have made have been under the umbrella of I have to have the answer. But just like a therapist, you can't instill into the person what you think and feel. You can provide safety and boundaries. I should say it every time I talk about safety. You have to have a self. You have to have boundaries. What I would encourage a new parent to do is to go to therapy or 12 steps. If money's an issue, go to 12-step programs. Learn. Jamie says in her newest book, Doing Psychotherapy, that came out about 2 weeks ago, she explains how somebody who's been through their own therapy, they understand how things can go wrong because and they're learning about it in the context of themselves. So humility is good. The second thing I would say, or the second major idea that I would insert here with this question is, and this may sound counterintuitive, I think it is, but you will dent them. You will make mistakes. And I think it's important from the get-go that your bubble get burst, that you can get it right and come out of this thing a winner. I had a father say to me a few years ago, after years of work on himself and with his daughter, and his daughter at this point had gone through a very difficult, life-threatening teenage stage of her life. And this might have been the last time we talked. And I talked to him over the course of 5 or 6 or 7 years. And he said, I've thought about it a lot. And, you know, if I said to you, Brad, he said, that I'm going to give you a project and it's going to be the most important project in the world that'll give you the most meaning, but you'll fail at it. And the question, of course, was rhetorical, and I didn't even have a chance to answer. And he said, "That's what I feel like as a father." My daughter, I was talking to my daughter Emma. She's in her late 20s, and we were talking about just having a discussion. She initiated it, trust me, about whether or not she was going to have children at some point. And she said, I just don't know if I can learn all that I need to learn without having a child. And I said, it's hard. I mean, there are other relationships that can sort of substitute and play a similar role. Sigmund Freud explained, if you want to teach something to somebody, give them a task that they cannot be successful at. The most effective way at breaking through somebody's narcissism, and I'm not talking about diagnostic narcissism, in the DSM manual. I'm talking about the narcissism that the self-centeredness, the ego centricity that we all have, is the thing that breaks through it is failure. That's why the most dangerous thing that can happen to a narcissist is success. So find people to talk to, listen in, tune into these broadcasts, read the books that I've talked about, find something there that suits you and read it and expand yourself from there. I should say parenting from the inside out. Parenting from the inside out, and I have 2 or 3 broadcasts on it, is one of the best books in the world on parenting, in my opinion. Co-authored by Daniel Siegel and Mary Hartzell. The Drama of the Gifted Child, it's a tough one to read, but in my opinion, it's the most important book on child development. What's Jamie's called? She has a similar one to The Drama of the Gifted Child. The Good Child. The Misery of the Good Child is Jamie's version of it. And then I think it doesn't relate to parenting directly, but the best book on boundaries that I've ever read is The Dance of Anger. Those are some in my background that have changed my life and that I go back to again and again and again. Somebody writes, I heard you say a lot about getting to know your shadow. Still not sure how to access and or recognize my shadow, or to know if it is my shadow or depression. Can you share with me more about this? Well, the best book on this, in fact, the best book on this is the first chapter and the preface of a book. The book that I'm referring to is called Meeting the Shadow. And the subtitle is really provocative. Understanding the power of the dark side of human nature. Meeting the Shadow, understanding the power of the dark side of human nature. And the introduction and preface are rich, and they talk about how to discover your shadow. And the first chapter is by Robert Bly about how the shadow develops. And then there are, I don't know how many, 30 or 40 more authors that have essays in the book. The book was edited by Connie Zweig and Abrams. I can't remember Abrams' first name. So Meeting the Shadow is a great book, and I did a broadcast on that. But the shadow is simply the part of us that we were shown in our early contexts growing up. We were shown that was unacceptable. Anger may have been unacceptable in your family. So anger goes into the shadow, into the bag, as Robert Bly puts it, that we drag behind us. Sadness, weakness. For me growing up as a identifying as male growing up, being vulnerable and needing was something that went into the bag, right? That's my shadow. For others, it might be being assertive, is being bossy or too autocratic, right? You learn, it could be a certain thought, it could be your sexuality, it could be anything that people reacted. They may not have said that's unacceptable, although sometimes they do, but they react with disgust, disdain, impatience, anger, punishment. And so it's the parts of us that we sacrifice, we jettison to fit in, and we develop what is called the false self, right? The mask that we wear to fit in, to be accepted, to be okay in this world. And therapy, it's not an overstatement. Therapy, in some large part, is discovering who you were before the world told you to be. And it's not just mom and dad. It's your peers, it's your teacher, it's the culture, right? The zeitgeist that you grew up in, that you live in, that tells you what's acceptable. Black people should act this way, white people should act this way, boys should act this way, girls should act this way. And we learn. We learn from, if you grew up in, a rural town, you have a different zeitgeist than if you grew up in Los Angeles or New York or Seattle. So it's all those parts of ourselves that we jettison to find acceptance. That's the shadow. You can find it in your humor. You can find it in your sarcasms. You can find it in your reactions to people. You can find it in your projections toward other people. All of that becomes a part of the shadow, the dark part of us that therapy helps to discover, because it's a safe place. Remember I said the other night, remember how I explained that one of the things that I love to hear from a client is the lead into a disclosure where they say, I know I'm not supposed to think this way. I know I'm not supposed to feel this way. I know this isn't right, but when somebody leads with that, I realize that I'm about to hear something that's the truth, part of their shadow. And that's why therapists who get directive and opinionated and try to fix you, they actually contribute to the shadow more than they do to help you uncover it and discover it. They become of the part of the should and the shouldn't in your life. Many of them do. I do sometimes. I have at times. So yeah, that's what it is. You discover it in safety, in a safe place. You get to say things. You get to say things to your therapist that you can't say anywhere else. I was just talking to somebody about this today. Somebody was describing. Oh, I know what it was. I was out to dinner last night with my family, and somebody was sharing with a close friend about a tattoo. Somebody in our family, one of the adults, was sharing with a couple of friends about a tattoo that they were thinking about getting, and they showed it to their friends. And the friends responded with, "Oh, don't do that. You'll regret that." And my adult family member said, I didn't even know what to say. It was so ridiculous that they would have that reaction. It's something I've been thinking about for a long time, and I thought about it today while I was running an errand. I thought it wouldn't occur to me to say that to somebody. It just wouldn't. Not just as a therapist, but as a friend or a father or a brother or a colleague. How do I know what you will regret or what you won't? Isn't life about making choices and learning? Regret is something that we're taught that we're supposed to. There's some. That's the thing. See, I was about to say the church, but I don't think it has to be the church. I've said many times, when I left the church, quote unquote, I realized that my shame and my guilt followed me right into psychology. Instead of a priest or a rabbi, my authority figure was Freud and Jung, right? But there's this idea in our culture that guilt, not shame. I think we've realized that that's pretty harmful across the board. But guilt and regret are virtuous. I was reading. I think it was a book by James Hollis. Might have been by Richard Rohr. He's a Catholic priest who also has written some wonderful books on analytic therapy and theory. And the church made guilt and regret a virtue. And so the more you felt bad about yourself, the more you regretted, the more pious you were. What a dangerous, damaging trap to the soul, to the psyche, to the human being, incorporating that idea into them, into who they are. So, yeah, hope that helps. Looks like we don't have any other questions that are queued up. Anybody else want to say anything before I jump off or ask anything? I'll go to some upcoming. My two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. I read The Audacity to Be You. We have intensive. If you want to do a deep dive, I tell you this all the time. I believe in this as much as anything that I've ever done. Finding You, October 5th through 9th is the next offering. We also have online offerings. November 11th is the next online offering. And in October 12th through 16th, I'm going to be running a Returning to You. This is the greatest therapy springboard or accelerator I've ever been a part of. My adult children have gone willingly. They want to go back. They want to keep going. My wife has gone. I've gone to more than 8 of them. My business partners have gone. I've sent several of my therapists. I've sent friends. I believe in this. And by the way, when I talk about all the programs I just said that I sent people to, none of them were ours. I paid, or the company that I work with, that I run, paid for people to go. So I do it. Finding You, if you want to understand yourself, it's a great place to go to take a deep dive into that. Contact intensives at evoketherapy.com. We have support groups for wilderness families, current and alumni. September 8th is the next offering at 6:30 p.m. We have one a month that is just for wilderness alumni. September 27th is the next offering. And then we have a once a month intensive support group, September 13th. Contact Malia at evoketherapy.com for more information. Like I said, we have coaches, think therapists that do virtual therapy over Zoom or even the phone, that are trained in attachment-based therapy. Coaching, just contact coaching at evoketherapy.com. We have pursuit trips for families and young adults. Think Therapy Light, sober fun, customized to meet your family's needs. We ask all current parents of our program to just try 6 of any combination of Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, or adult children. You can go online. They even have online offerings and meetings. Also, refugerecovery.org and NAMI.org have great support and free resources in your area. All these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast, Spotify, or platform. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast, or you can go to soundcloud.com on your computer. Today, I'm happy to say we reached our highest ever one-day total, 11,400 listens today. SoundCloud.com on your computer. Also, you can watch the recorded versions with the video and the slides on Evoke's YouTube channel. You can find Evoke and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on Twitter and Instagram using the handles at Evoke Therapy and at Dr. Brad Reedy. You can also find Evoke Intensives on Instagram using the handle at Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And then we have the Evoke Therapy blog that is curated by Malia with new content each week. If you want to give to folks who can't afford therapy, if you want to give back, our charitable partners include ChooseMentalHealth.org, Sky's the Limit Fund.org, and the Evoke Family and EvokeFamilyFoundation.org. Those are great places to go. My next broadcast will be September 6th at 6:30 p.m., where I'll be talking about differentiation and codependency. I'm going to put a James Hollis spin on it. That's a Jungian, Carl Jung spin on it, talking about becoming responsible for your life. So that'll be next week, September 6th. I believe that's Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Look forward to that. Looks like I might have had a question come in. There it is. Somebody writes, my son just came to tell me something about how he wanted to beat someone up because someone else was unkind on a post to his friend. I listened and said it was okay to be angry, but to think about whether or not it was worth doing something like that and what might happen next, and if it would change the nasty person. He listened and seemed considering. Then he seemed to go after me about something. I didn't judge him and I listened. He seemed to come to me instead of his dad, but he then attacks me verbally and not his dad. I guess I feel like he's one of those people to avoid, as he really takes a lot from me and I don't know how much he gets from me. I love him, but I think I'm at a point of noting that he doesn't want to hear from me, but wants to come and unload on me. I am working on myself, and I think I'm at the point of not caring, but caring. What do you feel like? What do you do if you feel like being trying to be a part of your child's life in a minimum way is counterproductive? I think I understand the question. Um, and thanks for asking it. I'll say it to you this way. You're always allowed to take space if you don't have the capacity. That is something I preach constantly to my therapists, to my clients. If you don't have the capacity, it's okay to say, I can't. Now, we weren't taught this. I just disclosed earlier that part of my shadow was not having my needs met. So this is hard work for us codependents. But we can learn in the context of therapy to say things like, here's what I need right now. Here's what I can and cannot do. I say very often that in therapy, as we heal from our attachment wounds that develop into codependency often, as we heal from our attachment wounds that should and shouldn't turn into can and can't. Instead of you should be there for your son, it is you can or can't be there for your son. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, so that's just the foundation of being a self and having boundaries. And that is a lifetime of work, folks. I want you to hear that. It doesn't matter how clearly and articulate, if I explain it to you perfectly, it wouldn't change you or transform you. I know plenty in it, and I'm not completely changed or transformed. But then you know what the project is, right? You know what the project is. So, what I would say to you is, after you decide that you can, I think what he's looking for is just to be understood. I wrote in the I wrote this in the Journey of the Rogue Parent. In fact, I was finishing editing it. My wife and my youngest, we were on vacation in Marina Del Rey, California, and I would work during the day, and then at night we would go have dinner and do some fun things and visit family. And as I was finishing it, there was a morning where my daughter and I were cuddling in bed before they were going to take off for the day. And my daughter, she was probably, shoot, at the time, she was probably 7, 6 or 7. And she was just full of glee because she got to have uninterrupted time with dad and mom. And her other 3 siblings weren't there. And she said, I wish the rest of my siblings were dead. Because I was editing my own parenting book, I was ready for it. And I said, wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't that be wonderful if we had all the time in the world just for you and you didn't have to split it with the others? And I just paused, and you could see her relax. I think even at 6 or 7, she was anticipating what we often say, which is, that's a bad feeling. Or you can feel angry or sad, but you can't fantasize about the death of your siblings, right? But after the pause, after I validated the feeling, just the feeling, didn't say the other thing, didn't say what she couldn't think or do, she said, but I would miss them. Emma, who is the second of the 4, she said, Emma's my best friend and I would miss her. I didn't have to give the lecture. I want to tell you another story, and I've told it once or twice, but it's been a long time. I was one time sitting in a group of adolescent boys, and I was training the staff and I was training a new therapist. And we had that first letter, that first difficult letter from home. And after the young man read mother's letter, he was full of rage, especially because there were some references to his stepfather, his ex-stepfather, his mother's ex-husband. And as we were sitting there, he said, man, if I saw this guy, if I came across him in a dark alley, I would kill him without hesitation. And I watched the group react. I just stayed silent and watched. And I said, can anybody relate to, I'm going to call him Johnny. Can anybody relate to Johnny? And somebody started to give an analogy or a story about how they were angry at their roommate for a dog, and how the dog and their anger and the resentment of the dog occupied so much space in their head and they had to let it go. And I said, I'm not looking for a fix. It's a nice story, but can you relate to him? And then another person started to give another pleasant little lecture. And then I realized they don't know what I mean. They don't know what it means to relate to somebody. So I said, I'll tell you. And I shared about a time in my life when I felt that kind of rage and I wanted to kill somebody and I fantasized about it. I didn't give the solution or the answer. I just met them where they're at. Right? I was with them in their pain, which is the German word for empathy is to be with somebody's pain. I was with them. And then once I modeled it, then the rest of the group gave examples where they felt and fantasized about similar kinds of violent acts. And you could see the young man relax, feel safe, feel okay. His nervous system relaxed. He wasn't under threat anymore. He wasn't heightened. And because his nervous system is relaxed, he's not likely to act in violent ways. Anyway, we finished the group. We go over to our staff discussion as we often have during the day. And the staff said, among other things, they said, Brad, but what about the fact that you can't kill somebody? It doesn't solve anything. When do you get that point across? And I said, later. I said, you have to lower the defense system, which is the nervous system, the fight or flight, right? And that's what he's expressing. And I'm not talking about, again, compromising your boundaries if he's being violent or aggressive or abusive or too much for you. You're allowed to have your boundary anytime. But I explained to the staff, I don't know when that defense will be lowered. But I know one thing. It's probably not going to be in his first group focused on him where he's reading letters from home about why his parents send him to the program. I'm quite confident that's not going to be the moment to teach him or introduce something like you can't be violent and you can't kill somebody and you can't beat them up. One last story, not as severe. My son came to me, I think testing me. He was 17 or 18 at the time. He was about to go away to college for his first year of college, summertime. And he had an interview that he had at I think it was a photography store, maybe an assistant to a photographer. My son's an artist. He was set to go to the Art Institute of Chicago. And he came into my bathroom while I was getting ready in the morning, shaving or whatever I was doing. And he said, I got an interview at such and such. And I lied to them and told them I was going to be here all year. Even though I'm leaving, second week in August. And I was primed to give the dad lecture, right? To empathize and then teach him the right way to be. But again, I had a good moment, which, are few and far between sometimes. And I just looked at him and I say, I wonder how that'll go. Let me know. I'll be curious. He comes back a few days later. He says, I told them that I was leaving in August. And I said, what happened? He said, they didn't want to hire me. It wouldn't work for them. And I said, why did you tell them that? He said, because my friend Josh told me I was being an idiot. See, Josh could get away with that because he's a friend. If I had said in the most sophisticated, articulate way, that's probably not the best plan, and talked about integrity and all that stuff, it wouldn't have worked. And I do think I could remember the setting. I can remember seeing him. I think he was testing me to see if we were going to go back into that old pattern. Now, lying about a job interview and when you're going to college is not beating somebody up or killing your ex-stepfather. I realize that. Those are much more, the costs of that, right, are much greater. But there's an energy there. The kids in our lives don't need lectures as much as we think. They are not missing data. I used to say to kids when they would ask me why question after why question, why can't I go home? Why can't I call my girlfriend? I worked with adolescent boys who, young folks who identified as male. Why can't I come home in between this and the next program? And of course, having practiced my answer quite a bit, I would try to answer it sometimes, which often devolved into an argument. And then I realized why doesn't mean why. It means I don't like it. But I did this little experiment and it worked every time. We're in wilderness therapy, so we're eating healthy foods, we're getting good sleep, we're getting good exercise, right? All the healthy things. But we have a couple of rewards, and one of them back in the day was they would get a pound, that big bag of M&Ms, if they did something special, something extra. There were a couple of things that they could earn if they did extra skills or extra tools. So I said to them, which this was out of the norm, I said, I will give you a pound of M&Ms, that bag of M&Ms that normally you would get only if you busted 10 fires or 12 fires or 15 fires or did a 6-second fire, 7-second fire, whatever it was. I said, I'll give you a bag of M&Ms, a pound of M&Ms, if you can tell me why it might not be a good idea for you to go home or to call your girlfriend. Before I could finish the hypothetical scenario, they were giving me point by point bulleted reasons why it wasn't a good idea for them to go home or call their girlfriend or call their parents. They're not missing data. They just have feelings. And if we confuse that, we'll end up inadvertently gaslighting them, trying to talk them out of their feelings. And we won't see it because they're not really articulating them in the formal sense of I feel scared, I feel angry, I feel sad. So somebody writes, you talk about the 12-step program, so I'm assuming that you are sober. What led your decision to become sober? I'm not sober. I'm not in recovery for alcohol or drugs. It's not my issue. I'm in recovery for codependency. That's my recovery. And I think the 12 steps is probably one of the best programs in the world because it's free. You can virtually go to a meeting anytime, anywhere in the world, online or in person. And it's just a good pattern for living your life. So no, I'm not abstinent from alcohol. I'm not. It's not, but I know that the principles of sobriety, of balanced living, I would have young adults say to me, I'm not an alcoholic or I'm not an addict. And I'd say, good. The 12-step principles will make sure that you don't become one. Because you can't be an active alcoholic and be living the 12 steps. They're incompatible. One is a spiritual practice of balance and humility and self-awareness and constantly looking at your stuff. And one is an effort to not be present in your own life. So yeah, it's a spiritual, psychological, self-help program that's free all over the world all the time. And I love some of my favorite groups. I love Al-Anon and Coda meetings, alanon.org and coda.org. My favorite meetings that I've ever attended, I think, might be adultchildren.org, Adult Children of Alcoholics. And my parents I wouldn't identify them as alcoholics at all or addicts. My grandparents, maybe, but it's about being the child of a human parent. All these labels, remember this, I'll say it this way. Mental health and mental illness is a continuum, and we're all on it somewhere. And yes, technically, there are thresholds that we cross that qualify us for the diagnoses, but who cares? It's irrelevant. Whether you're a 7th degree alcoholic or just a codependent, anxious person, you still have work to do. That is your work and nobody else's. So, all right, folks, I'm going to wrap up. Looks like that's all the questions we have. Thank you so much for your questions. I really appreciate it. For and on behalf of the people that you love and care about, thank you for attending. Thank you for doing your work so that you can best serve and be there and love the people that you care about and that love you. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next Tuesday. Take care. Bye-bye.